Florida State head football coach Mike Norvell talks about setting the standard. Will the Noles do just that against Georgia Tech?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of Locked On Seminoles. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thank you once again. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles football with me. Today's show is going to be fun because we're going to talk about what Mike Norvell discussed on Inside Seminole Football with the setting of the standard. We're going to talk about the keys to the game. We're going to talk about predictions that On3 had. A lot of fun stuff today here. And we're also going to talk a little DJ Uiagalelei. So first off, what is the standard? Norvell had some interesting quotes on the show, and I like listening to him talk about the broad topics. And a few of the points that I thought were interesting, the limited number of times to play. In football, it's different than like baseball. MLB, for example, there are 162 games. That's a lot of games. College football, you have 12 regular season games, and that's up. It used to be 10, then it went to 11, now it's 12. Got conference championship games. They're trying to increase it because of all the ad revenue. Let's not kid ourselves, but it's still not anything comparable to baseball, not even basketball. The NBA has 82 games. College basketball, teams that are really good will play into the low 30s, mid 30s. Well, college football is still not going to even get to half that for the teams that go to the national title game. So here's the deal. Florida State standard is to be good from the outset through. It's the hardest gauntlet there is, college football. Florida State did it last year, got to the ACC title game and whipped up on Louisville, and they had a great season, kind of set a high bar. Norvell discussed on Inside Seminole Football how they've done everything that has been asked of them, talking about FSU's players from spring all the way through the summer, all the conditioning, the individual workouts, 7-on-7, etc., and into fall camp. Now, that's some coach speak. I'm sure of that, and I'm guessing most of you can figure that out, what's he going to say. But at the same time, like, he went out of his way in the way he said it, and over again, that's a really good sign. Again, limited number of times to play. So you better have that standard. That's a key point. Number 2, go get better, be the best we can be. He was talking about that from an everyday perspective. And it caters off of that first point because everybody really wants to be the best, but humans have days where they're flawed. We all are in some way, shape, or form. I was curious that he talked about team like a million times, went out of his way to not mention individual players in this part of the segment. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And it's probably calculated because players are very sensitive and sometimes parents are, etc. You got to be careful what you say, even if it's avoiding a subject. It was smart talking points by Norvell. I don't know if it was intentional, but I'd imagine it was. Well done. To that point, this seems to be a very team-friendly locker room. They're good with the press. They're good with everything. These are signs that not only is this season going to be good about setting the standard, but Florida State football in general against Georgia Tech and moving forward, I keep seeing signs that the program will be consistent. If you take nothing else from this podcast, I guess that's probably the best news. Florida State's going to be consistent. I think it's interesting that I don't see as much of that. I watch a ton of press conferences. Some teams that I can't even stand. You can tell coach speak and all that for the most part, but I don't think Norvell really was here. And he does use some here and there, but not today. That was interesting to me. Finally, on this point, with Florida State taking on Georgia Tech, he brought up something that it's just true. He said we had to get 120 guys passports. Now, I'm sure a few guys had them anyway, but you want the entire team to experience that. You want to take everybody over there. It's an experience to go outside the United States. It's great. But the difficulty with the entirety of the staff, all the players going, all the pads, all the helmets, all that, that is quite the undertaking. And it is literally months-long process to get it done. And you got to have the players kind of locked in. You can't let 18 to 20-year-olds or 18 to 22-year-olds just go wandering around Dublin, Ireland, anywhere else. They're in a country they don't know. There's some civil unrest, to say the least, over in Europe. This is a difficult task. So if you are not a program on the rise, and if you have not set a standard, all of that can go wrong too, especially the players being in a foreign country. I'm very curious to hear the after effects of Florida State's players. Forget the game for a second, how they interacted with people, how the experience went, because this is the first time for these young men. It's very difficult. And for those of you going to the game, good for you. That's a really unique experience. Ireland's got some of the most beautiful countryside on planet Earth. But again, all of that leads into setting a standard. If you have that and you have an edge and everything we do is still about football, you're going to be better. I just don't see how Georgia Tech, no offense, how Georgia Tech is going to match that, because they haven't been in this situation where they're playing a team like this. They're kind of on the rise, but to start a season and then add in Ireland is just weird. I don't care what team you are. If you were Cincinnati, if you're Texas A&M or anybody else, there's nothing normal about starting your season on another continent. To that point, though, Florida State, I think the standard is very high, and I really hope that I'm proven right about this. Norvell went on and on about it, and I think it's a very, very good sign. Next up here on Locked On Seminoles, we're going to discuss JD PicKell's prediction, Florida State and Georgia Tech, and why he thinks things are going to happen the way they do. He discusses some of the points about DJ Uiagalelei. It's an interesting take, and he brought up some things that I thought were very, very important for Noles fans and Georgia Tech fans, for that matter, to consider. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. All right. Have you downloaded the Gametime app yet? If you have not, you should absolutely do so. It's an opportunity to get tickets to about anything. Here's an example. I haven't been to an NFL game in a while. The Gametime app will allow me to do whatever I want very quickly. You open the app, type in Atlanta Falcons, New York Giants, Miami Dolphins, whatever it might be. You can pick a game, click on a seat, and it will visually give you the display from that seat to what you would be looking at towards the field. Also, you can do that with a concert, a play, anything that you can possibly imagine. You can go see a symphony, whatever it is, the Gametime app will provide you that chance. So take the guesswork out of anything with buying concerts or anything else with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Also, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through the 22nd of September, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and download America's #1 sportsbook. So the predictions are starting for the Florida State versus Georgia Tech game. I'm going to give mine at the end of the week. Going to go over it again on Saturday and go from there and have a post-game show after the contest. Here's what JD PicKell says, and I'm just going over his points because I thought he did a great job. He works for On3. Check out their channel. They do a nice job too. These are some keys. And I've talked about one of these over and over again. It's probably ad nauseum for some of you. Trenches. He probably said it 4 or 5 times. He doesn't think that Georgia Tech's offensive line will be able to handle FSU up front. He even thinks so more than I do. Almost to the point where he just thinks it's going to be a mismatch. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but he said Marvin Jones. He's talking about Patrick Payton. They're going to get theirs. That was his phrase. I think that's a key point. And if that is true, the second part that he brought up quite a bit is going to be a problem for Georgia Tech. Flip it over to the other side of the football for a second. Florida State, and I think PicKell was right with this, is probably going to be a little more run heavy this year. He thought 57 to 60%, in that range, run to pass. I don't know if it'll be quite that heavy because what is quote unquote labeled as a run or a pass is still not always the same in the terms of the mind of a coach. So I think Florida State is going to screen teams to death this year because they have so many guys that are just good in space, and it's almost like basketball on grass. Jalen Lucas is just one of a gazillion guys. Jalen Brown, Blake Benson, you can bring like Cam, the freshman running back, is a bigger guy, but he will absolutely make you miss. They are going to screen teams to death. So the percentage is not what I'm concerned about, but also in some games, Florida State might throw it more than they run it, but there's so many screens, it's almost kind of like a run. Keep that in mind. He thinks that Florida State's going to be able to run the football and do so consistently, and he put a number on it, a pretty common one, 5 yards per carry or more. He says that with the number being the one that he used, at least from the sports books, I don't know which one he's going by, but 11.5 points, that's one of the book numbers I've seen. He says if FSU averages 5 or more, then Florida State will probably be in good shape and cover. He thinks they will. That's a pretty fair estimate, but there's still other things to look at with that. Do you get a big chunk yardage play that inflates the average? Like you get an 80-yard touchdown from Tofield, great. But then the rest of the game, the average is 2.2. That cannot happen. So I just want to add on to what JD was talking about. Consistency is prime here. Florida State, to his point, will probably run it a little bit more over a 12-game schedule than they will pass. I will grant him that. I don't think it'll quite be 57 to 60%, but we'll see. With that being the case, if Florida State even runs it 55% of the time, so 11 out of every 20 plays, I think Georgia Tech's in trouble. Why? Because that means game flow will be in Florida State's advantage. They will have a lead. And then back to that original point, Peyton, and just the entire defensive front, I think they're going to blitz. I don't want to leave anybody out. Darrell Jackson, the whole 9 yards. That group will eat, if you will, because there's no way around it. You're not going to just run the ball if you're down 10, 14 points late in the third quarter and think it's going to be the best way to do it. They got a great running back. Jamal Haynes, good, but you have to throw. It is proven by way of his 16 interceptions last year that if the game flow does not favor Georgia Tech, Haynes King is a guy that at A&M, as well as at Georgia Tech, he just gets too greedy, gets too impatient, too nervous, whatever word or words you want to use. He throws the ball to the wrong team. Now, they got some guys at receiver. I've given them their due. Talked about that yesterday's show. If you want to check that out here at Locked On Seminoles in regards to the opportunity to get busy in the passing game. They got some guys. But it's different when you're dropping 7 and rushing 4 who can really rush the passer. Florida State will be one of the nation's leaders again in the pass rush. So just to recalculate here, he doesn't like Georgia Tech's offensive line against Florida State's front. I don't either. He likes it even less than I do. They do have some good players up front. But if they get behind and Florida State is able to contain Haynes King a little bit, which you could argue is one of the most important, if not the most important thing for the Noles to do in this game, it's going to be hard for them to, quote unquote, sustain drives. Even one false start penalty, tackle for loss, whatever, can shut down a drive. But when you're going pass heavy, like 2/3 of your plays are passes, intended to be passes, and the other team knows that even a mediocre defense can eat that up. Florida State's pass rush combined with their ability to, in the back end, I don't like many teams against that at all. I wouldn't like Georgia. I wouldn't like Clemson. I wouldn't like Michigan, Texas, anybody. That is not the formula to win. It is imperative that both JD and myself are wrong about this. Florida State will be able to run the ball, especially on first down, and average 5 yards. Because if they get ahead, chewing up the clock, I would bet a very high number that you're going to see some picks. at least a couple. And some of them might even just be deflections because Florida State's dropping 7 guys, might even drop 8 in some kind of specialty situation with the defensive end taking the flat. So I'm not sure how the game flow will go, but what he's talking about, he thinks Florida State is definitely better up front on both sides and is going to give Georgia Tech a lot of problems. He said something else that I thought was interesting, and maybe we differ a little bit on this, but he thinks DJ Uiagalelei is pretty good, and I'll have my own take on him in a moment. But I want to break down a little bit of what was said from JD. It was interesting because he said 12 of 22 could be a stat line for DJ, meaning completing 12 out of 22 passes for, I think he said, 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. While that's possible, I just don't think Florida State's going to run the ball that much. I mean, with 22 passes, that means it's like 2-1. Minimum, like 41 carries, 43 carries. You're going to be in the 60s in total snaps at least. If it's that high, that means Georgia Tech just got absolutely thumped, and or Florida State turned the ball over a gazillion times. Because if you're running that much, that means you're fumbling if you didn't win. Because if you're running 40 sometimes, you're controlling the clock, you're beating them up in the trenches, and it's like 2nd down and 4 on a pretty consistent basis. It is possible you have turnovers. I get that. But you said 12 of 22. I personally, like my stat line that I wrote down just as an initial that I'm going to talk about, is quite a bit higher. I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. But if it does get into the, like, DJ doesn't even throw 25 passes, Georgia Tech is in a ton of trouble. Little spoiler alert, he picks Florida State to win and to get what he calls a backdoor cover, which is possible. It's 11.5, so you kick a field goal late in the game, you go up 34-20, something like that, and you cover. That's possible. I could absolutely see that. But I also think that this game will be a little closer than most people think. And again, I'll give my full prediction at the end of the week. I want to see a few more things regarding injuries because that's always everything. I'm trying to get as much information as I can. And always, injuries are number one predictor of who wins a football game. That will never change. So I'm not quite there yet. On Friday, I'll do that. But Florida State's run game, he's even higher on it than I am. And I like all 6 running backs that Florida State has. That's really impressive. He's also very keen on the running game in terms of what they got up front. So respect to the O-line, they have come a long way in the last couple of seasons. Florida State should have one of the best offensive lines in college football. Last point to this, I'm curious about the run game for Georgia Tech. He mentioned it. They're going to have some diversity to balance out what Florida State can do against the Georgia Tech offensive line, and I think they'll do a good job of that. Remember, this is an entire summer that you're not only preparing for game 1 if you're Georgia Tech, you're trying to establish your program. This is a big game for recruiting. It's an ACC game. It's a program that has a lot of respect in the national spotlight last year. All these things. This game means more in a lot of ways to Georgia Tech than it is Florida State. They're going to throw the kitchen sink from a playbook standpoint, or at least I expect them to, or they're probably going to be in trouble. They're not just going to line up and run zone and be successful. They can do that to a certain degree. They're going to need some gadget plays to add into what they do. And Haynes King is certainly the guy to do it. He's a great athlete. He might be the guy that catches a pass. He might be the guy that helps on a reverse. They might line him up out wide and put Eric Singleton at quarter. There could be anything. It's game 1. Do not be surprised. So, and again, in his own words, JD said diversity in the run game. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. He thinks zone will be the easiest way because he doesn't think they're just going to pancake block Florida State. He's right. But they got good guys too. So I'll be curious to see what they come up with. Coming up next here on Locked On Seminoles, I'm going to talk about DJ Uiagalelei's expectations for me, compare them to what JD said, and kind of go from there as we get closer to game day between Florida State and Georgia Tech. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back each and every time you get on there. Earn hundreds of dollars off on like groceries, beauty supplies, even a toy for your kid. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're doing when you use Ibotta. The average user earns $256 back per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you wanted, or anything else on your mind. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including some of your favorites like Lowe's, Macy's, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 off for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Here are my thoughts in compared to what JD said about DJ. He projected somewhere in the range of 22 passing attempts, 12 completions, 196 yards, and a couple of scores. I'm at least somewhere in that perspective. But this is what I expect and why I think Georgia Tech will be interesting from a defense to go against. Florida State has a ton of speed. Everybody knows it. They're going to try to hit home runs off play action. They're probably going to be pretty successful at running the ball, which sets up play action. Sounds easy. No, it's not. Here's why. A, it's first game, transfer quarterback. You've got all these new pieces. Malik Benson's a new player. Jalen Brown's a new player on the roster, and they've ascended to starting roles. Ja'Kai Douglas is the only starter listed on Florida State's depth chart that is a returning player at one of the three receiver spots. You lose your best tight end. You lost your top two receivers. Moving parts galore. Good news is they got an offensive line that's pretty darn good, to say the least. And it's still the same system for them to use, and they can help everybody else, especially at the skill spots. And oh, by the way, Tofili kind of helps too. With that being the case, I think Florida State's going to see a lot of soft defense, cover 4, cover 3. I'm not going to get into all the fun stuff with that and talk coverage here on the podcast too much, but basically that is, if you throw it over our head, it's on the player more so than it is on our play call. That is, make you throw a gazillion times, try to create 10, 12, and 14 play drives. And Florida State's built to do that. I think they're going to go that route, even though they are definitely an improved defense based on the personnel coming back. They got a key guy up front, missed last year, really good player. It's a team captain. They've got Zeke Biggers up front, 320-pound nose guard. He's a very good football player, but they don't have enough guys, in my opinion, in the secondary that are dominant, not just good, but absolutely no doubt like first, second round picks, where they're going to be able to line up and go man on man and or a lot of combo coverages and get complex. Prove me wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll eat my words after the game. I don't see that happening, but we'll see. And they're going to try to keep Malik. They're going to try to keep Jalen. They're going to try to keep everybody, the other Jalen too, in front of them. I think that's going to create a lot of easy, shorter passes, which is not going to be Florida State's MO overall this year, I don't think. But he's going to have some shorter to intermediate passing opportunities. I think his stat line will be much different than what JD thinks. I'm going to go with like 19, maybe even 20 completions, but out of like 34 attempts. They're going to try to hit a lot of short stuff because they're going to give it to him. I used the evidence from the Pittsburgh game last year as example A. Keon didn't play. Johnny didn't play. That's rough. They came up with ways to get Jaheim the ball more. Ja'Kai Douglas had 115 yards in that game. Short passes, quick passes, let athletes be athletes. Let's not overcomplicate this. But going into that game, I thought, okay, Pittsburgh's got a pretty good pass rush every year, good D-line coach, really well respected. They're going to try to keep Jordan out of harm's way, hand it off, play it pretty conservative, hit a few shots. More like what I think this game will be in some parts of it. But I was wrong then, and as more I look into this game, I've changed my opinion. It's not going to be a shot game. Florida State is going to throw more short to intermediate because Georgia Tech's going to play off. If they get behind early, and I mean like double digits, that could change. But at least early on, like if Florida State goes up 14-0 in the first 7 minutes, what I'm saying could completely change. I don't think it'll be like that. But cover 4, cover 3, some cover 2 that's pretty conservative, like 12, 14 yards off the ball, would not surprise me. Those are defenses you're going to try to run against and try to do it pretty early, and then you can just hit underneath passes. Now, you got to be patient. But if he goes 20 of 34, and that is my prediction, I've got him for 210 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. That would be fine. And I think that Florida State would be right there pretty much where JD has. I think he's got Florida State winning 27-13. I'm a little higher scoring. I'll talk about that again on Friday, but I think Florida State will be in a good position. The only thing that I am concerned about with DJ Uiagalelei is the pick a big play. Is it a complete stupid play like that one that's a pick six that changes the game? You just don't know. I'm not going to go into that much detail, but there is a bonus here with him being on the field. I grant you that Jordan Travis is a gazillion times better as a runner. Not debating it. DJ's a little better than people give him credit for, especially in short yardage. And you can take it any way you want. Well, I don't think he'll average a lot of yards per carry by college stats. This, by the way, dumbest stat line ever that college has compared to the NFL. Rushing yards for quarterbacks includes their sacks. That should be a passing stat. So it's always a little jaded, if you will. But I think he'll have like 7 carries for 15 yards, but at least 1 touchdown. Have at least a couple of rushing first downs. It's not about the total here in terms of yardage. It's more about DJ making key plays when they're needed. He's a 5th-year senior graduate student. He started at Clemson. He has started at Oregon State. That's part of his stat line in some ways will be as, if not more, valuable to the Florida State Seminoles than what he does throwing the football. The other thing that I think is important for him, and forget passing completely for a second, and arguably the most important for the offense overall, Georgia Tech has, again, new personnel coming back. How does he set protection and audible to things that are not only good for what his eyes see, but that the players feel comfortable with? This is part of chemistry you just don't know. We're just going to have to see. I'm blind on it like everybody else. Are they comfortable with what they're going to run? You try to set this up in the week of the game, and Norvell and his staff have done a great job with Jordan doing that, but new quarterback. Is DJ just going to nod his head in the meetings? Yeah, I like that too. Or is he going to be really voiceful and say, no, I don't want to do that. In this situation, here's what I want and here's why. I have no idea what DJ is going to be like in the meetings. They're going on like Tuesday, Wednesday before they pack up and head over to Ireland. I have no idea. But it is very important that you adjust on the fly. You're going to see some weird fronts from Georgia Tech. I guarantee it. They run a 3-man line that changes your run game and your pass game, and get a little more specific what kind of screens you run and when. Biggers in the middle is big. That is a apt definition. 6'6", 320. So are they going to shade him? Is he going to play a zero tech, which is straight up on Big Mo at center? All these little things can change your play call on every down. If he calls the right kind of game and adjusts, he might adjust a ton. It's hard to say because they might go to some 4-man line, put their outside linebacker in a 3-point stance. He might play a 7 technique, which means he's way outside the offensive tackle. You got to adjust with that. And you got to know which guy behind you is your runner. He's going to, again, we're probably going to see the Noles run it a little bit more than they pass. I'll guess 55-45 on a percentage. But if you pick the right fronts, it's not just that you ran it. You give your guys a better chance to hit home run plays. And obviously, if Florida State runs, like JD said, for 5 yards or more a clip, it's lights out for Georgia Tech, or really any team. You can't give up 5 yards of play against a team that has the speed that Florida State does at receiver and running back, and it go well. And then you also got to think about Morlock and West and all the guys they have at tight end. Those guys are not going to get a lot of attention. You get the run game and the short passing game going, tight ends will be wide open. So those are some of the things to think about with DJ Uiagalelei. He has a big responsibility in helping to set the standard. Speaking of, thank you very much for coming in to check out Locked On Seminoles. Really, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a lot of fun to do this, and I'm going to be a part of this for a long time. So come back in and check us out again tomorrow. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and make sure you check out Locked On Seminoles every day. After this, though, after your first listen, now go check out Locked On College Football's podcast, from NIL to the ACC to the grant of rights situation Florida State's in. I'm going to be talking definitely with Spencer about some of that. Spencer McLaughlin is the host of Locked On College Football. He does a great job. Check that out next, right after this show. Thank you again, everybody. Have a good one.